And my esteemed panelists. We've got a really exciting and interesting and full program this morning, and I'm not going to spend any more time than I need on these first few slides, but I wanted to kind of set some ground expectations here. So the first thing I want to do is acknowledge the Arctic Research Commission, whom I work for. My name is Cheryl Rosa. I am the Deputy Director and the Alaskan Director of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. And we are not ARCIS and we are not the Arctic Council. Those are two of the most common misconceptions that we see. We are actually independent, very small independent federal agency that develops national Arctic research policy, facilitates Arctic research cooperation, reviews federal programs for Arctic research, recommends improvements in cooperation between the state of Alaska and all of its stakeholders and international groups. So that's a little bit of background on us. And I will go over, we've got a bunch of partners that are working with us on this workshop conference, and I will go over them with just a few minutes. We do have a group. The Arctic Research Commission has several working groups that are focused in different areas of science that need research support, and one of which is the Arctic Renewable Energy Working Group. And our mission is to benefit Arctic communities by identifying and addressing critical research needs in renewable energy and energy efficiency. We've been around since around 2015, and we've spent the first few years of our work focusing in on the cost of home heating oil. We are very hopeful that as we move forward with the sustainable energy work, that will come out of this conference with a few new charges in terms of next steps for our working group. Over the last year, we've been focused on having different workshops, and this is one of them. We had worked with ASEP on an electric vehicle workshop earlier this year. You can see the objectives of the group all have to do with research, improving energy efficiency and integration, renewable energy into rural Alaskan villages, promoting better understanding of the cost benefits of renewable energy, and then making village level investment in renewable energy less risky, making it easier for people to get into it from the point of view of local community needs. So, excuse me, sorry. The overarching question for this workshop was, how do we shape research to best serve community needs? We have been trying to figure out how to shape this. This entire program is shaped basically around this question. And it's very important, as you'll hear from our first set of keynotes, and the keynotes all together this morning, that are very much centered on climate change, energy, and equity in small rural communities in the Arctic. As we go through today, we have a set of objectives. The first is to provide a forum to share the latest information on sustainable energy research in remote and cold climate communities. The second is to determine sustainable energy research gaps. So we want to know about needs that are out there in the Arctic and subarctic regions. And then to investigate links between renewable energy research and climate and energy equity, and discuss changes in policies that are needed to meet climate goals and community needs. So through especially our keynotes today, I think we're going to come out of this with a lot of questions and hopefully some solutions and some ideas of what community needs are and how to move forward to address them best. We have 3 sessions over the 3 days. Today is our keynote session that will be focused in 2 parts on climate, energy, and community needs. Tomorrow we'll be focused in on buildings and infrastructure. Energy efficiency and distributed energy resources will be the 2 sessions. And then on the 3rd day, we'll be talking about sustainable energy in general, and the sessions will be focused on technologies and then integration. We will have panel discussions at the end of each of the sessions. So with the keynotes, we will have the first 3 keynotes, we'll have a half an hour break, and then we'll follow that up with a couple more keynotes and then a 45-minute discussion. During this discussion, we'll be answering questions from the audience, and then we'll also have some questions that we'll be asking a panel, and we'll have some community members be joining the panel to be part of the conversation. The same will go for each of the sessions on day 2 and day 3. though because we have less time allotted, we probably will focus more on question and answer from the attendees. Though we do have some questions that we may ask that we've talked to the folks that are in the sessions about ahead of time. And then finally, our deliverables from this workshop and our partners on this, we've come up with a website that lives at arctic.gov, and I'll put that up at the end of the day so that folks can take that down, but it's just arctic.gov. We have information on research gaps and needs that we will be working on, a document related to that during this, as what comes out of this program. Presentation summaries, and then a video recording of the proceedings and individual presentations that will be posted on the website as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the chair of the Arctic Research Commission. David Kennedy is our relatively new chair, though we've worked with him for years as the senior Arctic official or Arctic person for NOAA. And David, can you hear me? Do you want to take it away from here? We've got to unmute you.
How about now? Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, David.
Yes.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, as Cheryl's mentioned, I've worked with the commission for many years. Have a great relationship with Cheryl and John Farrell. And so it was indeed an honor to be named a commissioner, and then a surprise, but certainly an honor to be named the chair just recently. On behalf of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, I would like to welcome you to the Arctic Sustainable Energy Research Conference. The Arctic Research Commission, as Cheryl has mentioned, is a small, independent federal agency tasked with outlining recommended scientific research goals and objectives for the Arctic. The commission also develops and recommends national Arctic research policy and builds cooperative links in Arctic research federally, locally, and internationally. In 2015, the commission created the Arctic Renewable Energy Working Group to bring Alaska-based federal, state, tribal, and NGO energy experts together to work on hard problems best solved in an all-hands approach. Our WIG's mission is to promote research on renewable and efficient energy systems in remote Arctic communities. 90% of households in remote Alaskan communities use heating fuel, according to US Census data. The state average cost hovers around $4.50 a gallon. In these communities, with highs as much as $15 a gallon in places like Shishmaref. The working group jumped in with both feet to tackle issues related to these high costs. They gathered experts in the field and produced a report focused on research needs for residential heating Alaska's rural villages, and followed this report up with the publication of an implementation roadmap that outlined how to get these needs addressed. The subject matter was not randomly chosen. The high cost of home heating fuel was consistently on the minds of rural residents and voiced during our commission meetings, field trips, and interaction with residents in rural Alaska. The importance of these communications should not be underestimated, as working together on these problems is critical to successfully addressing them. Today, sustainability, energy equity, and climate change are on people's minds. Sustainable power is key for a climate neutral future. In recent months, the US government has announced, there's quite a list, the establishment of the National Climate Task Force, a plan to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030. That's enough energy to power 10 million homes and cut 78 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. Research into hydrogen as a green alternative to fossil fuels. Creation of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. the PCAST, which is co-chaired by the president's science advisor, who I understand will be up for consideration here in the next few days to be confirmed, will advise the president on policy that affects science, technology, and innovation. And finally, a commitment to environmental justice and scientific integrity. During our keynotes, we'll hear about the connections between environmental change, energy, and equity in Arctic communities. In addition to the more obvious benefits of decreasing fossil fuel extraction, transport, and combustion, there is the less tangible benefits of energy security, a relatively new term for many. To hear residents of Kodiak, Alaska state what an amazing feeling it is to be 100% diesel gensets off, meaning 100% fossil fuel independent. Independent is a positive thing that we hope other communities can move towards with the help of research into subject areas such as sustainable tech, R&D, economics, social science, and human behavior, to name a few. On the final day of this conference, Earth Day, the president will host a Leaders Climate Summit. This conference is timely and fits well with this activity and the nation's desire for a more sustainable future. I look forward to the next 3 mornings of presentations and exchange, and wish you all a productive conference. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chairman Kennedy. I appreciate that introduction and welcome to the group. And now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bruno Grinnell, who is the director of the Cold Climate Housing Research Center, NREL. And he is going to moderate this morning's, he's got a big task here. He's going to moderate both the pre and post session, getting your text here, pre and post session presentations this morning, and also the panel questions afterwards. And good luck, Bruno. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And it's an honor to be here with you all today. So thank you all for being here. And we're going to kick this conference off with a series of keynote speakers this morning, starting with Sunny Adams and Brian Hirsch. And they're going to share with us an Alaska-specific context of energy and climate equity. And Sunny Adams, he's the Director of Energy at the NANA Regional Corporation. Sunny has worked for NANA Regional Corporation as a projects manager since 2007 and is currently the Director of Alternative Energy. He's a graduate of Montana Tech and has a degree in metallurgical and materials engineering. And Mr. Adams' past experience include technical oversight of the Red Dog mine, nanogravel issues, and shareholder development. Prior to working with NANA, he worked as an operator and metallurgical engineer at the Red Dog mine. And his milling experience includes water treatment, flotation, grinding, and control room operation. And we also have with us Dr. Brian Hirsch, who is the president and co-founder of Deerstone Consulting, LLC. And Dr. Hirsch is Dr. Hirsch is, okay, so he's the president and founder of Deerstone Consulting, and it's a renewable energy consulting firm focused on microgrid, utility, and community development in remote locations, especially in the Arctic and the tropics. Recent ongoing projects include developing solar photovoltaic, wind battery, diesel hybrid systems across Alaska and providing technical support to Alaska Native regional organizations and other groups covering over 120 communities across Alaska. And from 2009 to 2015, he was a senior project leader for the National Renewable Energy Lab in Alaska's initiative and projects globally. So I'd like to hand it off to Sunny and Brian. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. My name is Sunny Adams. I'm the Director of Alternative Energy for NANA Regional Corporation. Today, Dr. Brian Hirsch and I will give a brief update on our renewable energy projects, along with some of the challenges we have in building Arctic microgrids. Next slide, please.
It's not going.
Oh, there we go. So on December 18th, 1971, President Nixon signed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, settling the land claims issued by transferring land titles to 12 Alaska Native corporations and over 200 local village corporations. Alaska Natives received compensation in order of approximately $962.5 million and fee simple title to 44 million acres of surface and subsurface estate. That equaled 1/10 of Alaska. As a result, ANCSA, Nana Regional Corporation, received 2.2 million acres of land and $44 million in cash. Next slide, please.
Not moving.
So this map shows the outline of our region. Our region is approximately 38,000 square miles. It's about the size of Indiana. We have approximately 14,000 shareholders, half of which live in the region. Although not shown here, our region has the second largest zinc producing mine in the world, called the Red Dog mine, and that mine is located up near Kivalina. Next slide, please. So within our region, there are no roads that connect the communities together. It's 61% more expensive to live in our region than it is to live in Anchorage. We have very high costs of goods and fuel. We've been monitoring this situation since the energy crisis hit in 2008. If you were to come into some of our villages, you'd see not only high fuel prices, but also high food prices as well. Our focus has been trying to improve the energy security for our region. And that's something that we've been working with the borough on. Next slide, please. So although this slide, it says the Nana Energy Vision, over the years since 2008, we've partnered with our tribes, and also we've partnered with the Northwest Arctic Borough on our energy vision. And that is, the energy vision for the Nana region is to be 50% reliant on alternative energy sources, both renewable and non-renewable. We believe at the Energy Steering Committee that we're on track to meet this goal. And this is large in part because of our partnership with Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy, and the significant community effort. I think a lot of our communities are behind with what we're doing. Our elders have given the green light, have given the blessing. So as much as we do not impact the subsistence and traditional activities. Next slide, please. So looking back on how we got started, we received a Department of Energy Strategic Energy Plan grant that led to the creation of our regional energy plan. We also formed the Energy Steering Committee, which is still in existence today. We try to have that meeting at least twice a year. We also performed an energy option analysis in 2008, 2009 for each of our villages. This was followed by an energy summit in Kotzebue. And we also did a regional energy survey. And what we found, that the common theme back then is that there was an escalation in diesel fuel prices that caused us to look at alternative energy for our region. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? Reason being is our energy prices continue to remain high throughout the region. As you can see from the two left columns, our gasoline and diesel fuel prices range from $3.35 to $10 per gallon. For our region, we use diesel fuel for electricity generation along with home heating. The two columns on the right show our electrical rates. The lower electrical rate on the left is our state subsidized rate called power cost equalization, otherwise known as the PCE rate. The column all the way to the right shows the actual rate without power cost equalization. So there's an incentive to keep your electrical rate below 500 kilowatt hours. And I will mention something that is an issue for our region. When we have overcrowding within the homes, families can easily go over that 500 kilowatt hour threshold, which causes their electrical rates to skyrocket. Also, because of these high energy costs, we have people leaving the villages and heading towards the city. Well, when you have a village and it has a fixed cost for that operation and maintenance, as people leave the villages, it puts more of a burden on the people that are remaining in the villages. And so, you know, we've been trying to push the sense of urgency that we need to work on it, and then we need to work on it quickly. Throughout the Energy Steering Committee meeting, we come up with all these different scenarios that can impact the fossil fuel chain supply. And as you can see, it's happening before our eyes, whether it be climate change, the pandemic, all these, you know, the wildfires, the earthquakes, you name it. There's always a chance that, you know, we're going to lose that diesel fuel supply. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of our regional energy costs in 2019. As you can see, our hub city Kotzebue, you know, takes the lion's share of all the fuel usage within the community. It also shows what the AVEC utilities use, along with some of the independent utilities, which are Deering, Buckland, and Kotzebue. It also shows the school district cost. And I think that's going to be one of our focuses here within this next year, is coming up with more data and sharing that data with Department of Energy, along with the Research Commission, to actually show, you know, we need to do something to get these energy costs down, especially for the villages that have to fly in fuel. That is very important that we get there. Next slide, please. So one of the best grants that we've received from DOE is the Intertribal Technical Assistance Grant. DOE awarded NANA $495,000 to create an intertribal network in the Northwest Arctic. It was a 5-year effort, and its main focus was local capacity building and economic development. We work with our 11 communities and tribes. We try to have village energy meetings with each of our tribes, and our focus on is to hear what they have to say and what they would like to see within their village. Of course, we'd like to see transmission lines. There's one community that needs a road from Noatak to the Red Dog port site to haul fuel. But I think the common theme here is if you have a village along the coast, you can put in wind turbines. And for the remaining villages that are the interior of Alaska, you would put in solar and batteries. So the overall goal for our region is to make the transition from the traditional power grid to the modern microgrid. And this is what we've done in Deering and Buckland. And you can see all the different components. You have the batteries, the diesel generators, the boilers, the solar, and the wind. And through this effort, we've been able to achieve diesel generator off operation. Next slide, please. So a lot of times when we're sitting on Energy Steering Committee meetings, we have to come up with these different priorities, but you can't just talk about them. You can't just study things to death. You know, our region has been studied since the 70s. And some of the feedback that we've gotten from our shareholders, we are tired of studies. We want to see steel in the ground projects. And so some of the things that we need help with in getting there is partnering up and working to identify what are the needs. So we know the critical path to village economic development are roads and interties. We always make the business case for high penetration renewable energy. And our main focus is to lower energy costs. One of the things that we need to integrate renewables is powerhouse upgrades. Some of this equipment that's in the villages that are 20 to 40 years old. So we need help with the powerhouse upgrades like the switchgear. This last year, our main focus is on workforce development. There's a training center in Kotzebue that we can utilize called the Alaska Technical Center. I think we need to build a broad spectrum of skill sets to help develop energy. And that'll be our main focus in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Here are some of the accomplishments that we've worked on since 2008. You know, we've secured funding for at least 6 of our villages for energy projects. I talked about the diesel generator off operation in Deering and Buckland. And we were also doing diesel upgrades in Buckland with hoping to replace the generator in Deering. One of our focuses with the borough, the Northwest Arctic Borough, is regionalization, trying to identify what services we can regionalize, like bulk fuel purchasing. Can we do transmission lines? Can we do training? Those sorts of things. Next slide, please. So one of the first grants that I'm going to talk about, and Dr. Hirsch here is going to take over on the Kotzebue project, was this DOE solar grant. Department of Energy was awarded $1 million to NANA to install community solar arrays in Deering, Buckland, and Kotzebue. That required a $1 million cost share. 200,000 came from Deering and Buckland, and 600,000 came from Kotzebue. Kotzebue Electric Association financed the $610,000 cost share for the project through the Northwest Arctic Borough Village Improvement Fund. And they also added additional internal funds. And NANA and KEA formed a joint venture to share ownership of the solar equipment during the grant period. There was also a joint venture agreement that was signed. Both Deering and Buckland used their VEDC monies, the Village Economic Development Committee funding, for their cost share. And I will say that money came from NANA Regional Corporation. You know, and this was a multi-community collaboration, but it was also a partnership with DOE that really got this project off the ground. They came up with the concept. So here's some pictures of our Buckland project. This system is operational, but it still needs performance monitoring and communication integration. We completed it in December 2019. It's the first box power installation. It had modified foundation and racking. And one of the things we focused on while we were doing this project is making sure that our shareholders were trained on how to repair it. So they participated in the actual construction of it. So here's pictures of our Deering solar array. This design was a little bit different. We actually put the super sacks within the connexes as the foundation. So these projects were rated at 145 miles per hour. It is operational. It has single 50 kilowatt inverters that help reduce cost. And at NANA, we try to maximize local hire. We worked with Ipnichak Electric, also the tribe in the city. It does have radio communication back to the power plant for full system control, including curtailment. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hirsch here. He's going to talk about the Kotzebue Solar Project.
Great, thank you, Sonny, and good morning, everybody. And so this is also a part of the same Department of Energy grant. Kotzebue, of course, as you saw from some of the earlier slides, is a very different situation. They're much larger. They have a lot of history and capability internally. And part of what was going on in Kotzebue was that they had wind turbines that were over 20 years old. And they were actually kind of past their useful life. But they had some of the infrastructure that was still operational, in particular, those communications and controls that are both expensive and problematic. They're always sort of an after the fact issue that during the construction, you kind of worry about it afterwards. But Kotzebue already had those pieces in place for their wind turbines. So what we ended up doing actually was pulling down some of the wind turbines that were no longer working, using the communication and some of the infrastructure that was already there, and then putting solar in its place. And while Kotzebue is known more as a windy place probably than a solar place up in the Arctic, it actually has pretty good resource from the solar side, and it balances things out because the wind is more prevalent in the wintertime and the sun obviously is more prevalent in the summertime. So there were a lot of innovations that occurred, including drilling in the permafrost that we weren't exactly sure how that was all going to go. Alaska Native Renewable Industries, which is based in interior Alaska in Huslia, really kind of led the charge on that. And it resulted in the largest solar array in rural Alaska at over 0.5 megawatt. There were a lot of lessons learned from the beginning in Buckland a few years earlier to Kotzebue just last summer. And really, what I was going to talk about here a bit is those lessons learned. What our challenge at this point is really driving down the costs. It used to be that people said, oh, wind won't work where it's cold out, right? Especially in places like the Arctic. And of course, Texas will probably still tell you that, but we know that that's not true. Kotzebue has been, was the world leader in that and proved that well over 20 years ago. I was involved in some of the very first solar projects in the Arctic, and they told us, oh, solar panels, they're not going to work in the Arctic. We've learned since then that solar works better when it's cold out. Of course, you need sun, but it works better when it's cold. It produces more energy because there's less electrical resistance in the solar panels. So then we've gotten to the point where, okay, we have wind and solar, but we have challenges integrating this with diesel generators. So actually, I'm going to move to the next one here. Well, so we ultimately, here's the visual of Kotzebue with the wind and solar in the same location. And so with the challenges with things like integration, we needed batteries in order to kind of act as a buffer between the wind and solar that's producing a lot maybe at one moment and then not so much at another moment, and the diesel generator that's trying to make up for that difference. So what we've learned is that with each step, we can improve the situation, we can repeat, we can at the margins tweak and lower our costs. So part of the goal here moving forward is to address so that this becomes a much more routinized, sort of a standardized process. And so let's see here. We're talking about batteries. So we moved from the Department of Energy solar grant and the technical assistance grant now to a USDA high energy cost grant, which allowed us to install the batteries and address the integration issues. So Kotzebue already has a battery in its diesel electric grid, whereas Deering and Buckland did not. And so we were able to secure funding, and again, first of its kind in the region, and first of its kind in the state, and really anywhere on a relatively large scale where we were integrating wind and solar and batteries into a diesel electric grid. The equipment we used was ABB is the power electronics company that really has the heart of the system, which you can see there, which is a microgrid control system and sort of battery oversight. And then SAFT were the types of batteries that we used. And then Kotzebue Electric, Northwest Arctic Borough, and Intelligent Energy Systems were all instrumental in helping this project get off the ground and succeed. We also were focused not just on displacing diesel that's used for electricity, but also diesel fuel that's used for heating. And so in the water plants, communities often use a lot of diesel fuel to keep the water from freezing. And so when there is excess wind and solar, we can divert some of that into the water plant with electric boilers and displace additional diesel fuel. So as mentioned here, this is really the first and second utility scale projects of this sort. And now we feel pretty confident about repeating this elsewhere. And so some communities in the NANA region, as Sunny mentioned, don't necessarily have as good of a wind resource. They're not coastal, but we're looking at very high penetration solar projects that would still use the batteries and integrate into the diesel. As well, what we found is that when we turn the diesel generators off for long periods of time, which in Deering had the diesel generators, we saved 40% of the diesel fuel, and the generators were completely shut off for 20% of the entire month of April, which is really pretty impressive. In the Arctic, it's often still pretty cold in the month of April. And what we realized is that we, at times, will need to add heat to the diesel generators when they're completely turned off. So in some ways, that's a good problem to have, but it was something that on one hand, we anticipated it. On the other hand, we said, let's get this thing working, and then we'll again sort of tweak at the margins to make that sort of final commissioning system work. The last thing I would say is that I don't want to get into this too much, but what we have found also is that because of the State of Alaska Power Cost Equalization Program that Sunny also mentioned earlier, it's basically a diesel fuel subsidy. So when you save diesel fuel, you lose part of the subsidy from the state. So we've been now trying to address that issue because we are saving substantial amounts of diesel fuel. And quite frankly, we don't want to lose substantial amounts of money that are associated with that. So we're trying to create institutional structures, specifically independent power producers in these individual communities that would own and operate the renewable energy systems and essentially sell this renewable power back to the local electric utility. And because of the structure of the PCE program, that would allow the funding to stay within the community, and less of the subsidy would be lost. So as was mentioned earlier, roads and interties are an important piece of the puzzle. These powerhouse upgrades, utility workforce development, and training people is really, really important. We found that this equipment works great, but it doesn't work forever. And right now we're still at the point where we're on the phone talking to people from North Carolina or from Florida or from wherever, trying to get the wind turbines back up running, or clearing a fault on the battery system. And so we're getting better at that. And we're really identifying what the most common problems have become, and developing training programs locally to really eliminate as much of that as possible. And so just like diesel fuel comes in from afar, and people are dependent on the fuel, people are also dependent on the skill sets to fix the equipment. And that's just another weak link in the chain that we're trying to address. Finally here, and this is trying to address some of the questions that we were asked as speakers here to comment on. And in particular, this concept of how do these projects inform broader policy, sort of looking at the universal through the particular lens. And I spent some time thinking about this in the last few days. And really what I've come up with is that the NANA region and a lot of these projects in many ways are sort of extraordinary. NANA has put a lot of its own financial resources into this. Finding somebody like Sunny Adams here, who is both a NANA shareholder and a devoted, committed person to this, who's been working at this for well over a decade, who has deep technical background and connection to the communities, et cetera. You don't find that everywhere. And so what we're talking about, though, is turning an extraordinary situation into something that becomes commonplace. That is the role of policy. So having the government provide funding, provide training, provide opportunities for people to retain their jobs and move up in their jobs and support organizations. Right now, we've had to bang our head against the wall very painfully at times to find funding for these projects and address the issues like the state subsidy around diesel fuel. And we've engaged lawyers and accountants and energy consultants and everybody else. Applying for these grants oftentimes are Herculean efforts that are very expensive. And so Some places, whether it's in the NANA region or if we're talking about tribes, a lot of times people talk about in the lower 48, like the casino tribes, right? It's not their fault. They happen to have some money and they're putting it toward good projects. But what we need is for every community in remote locations or struggling economically or with diversity, et cetera, to be able to access these kinds of programs and these opportunities. It's not just for the extraordinary. And so what we've learned over time, again, with repetition and replication and tweaking around the margins, is trying to get the costs down. We know now that the technology works, and our challenges are driving down costs, increasing reliability, training people, providing good jobs so people want to stay there and live in their communities. And people always want to do that. It's just a matter of not having the means to make that work. So we've, for example, even from the federal government standpoint, saying, oh, we're going to provide lots of tax credits. Well, there's not many opportunities to take advantage of tax credits in rural Alaska. There aren't big companies, even a lot of the native corporations don't have much of a tax appetite. So at this stage, we are trying to make the business case for these kinds of projects, but because they are so small, oftentimes we're still challenged on the economics, and there is still a need for grants to at least supplement the project. Right now, federal policies often require cost share, and one federal program can't support another federal program and have it count toward that cost share. And I know, having done a lot of work in Canada, for example, if the government supports a project, you can get 2 or 3 or 5 different government agencies that support the same project. And there's no issues or challenges with that. And it's really just a matter of us deciding that that's okay to do. And so that would be a recommendation, is to allow different government programs to support the same project, and whether that counts toward the cost share or just not have a cost share requirement would be something to think through. And the other thing is around the economic justification. Oftentimes we're struggling with justifying how these projects sort of make economic sense. And part of the issue is that accounting doesn't really account for everything. We're all probably familiar with the concept of externalities, where pollution, for example, is an externality that doesn't get counted in the project economics. But in fact, it is a real cost. Energy security, jobs, fuel diversity, all of those things are not really counted currently in the economic evaluation. And hence, a lot of the renewable projects are seen as not quote unquote economic. The last thing I would say here, and I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, is this be creative to create economies of scale. While these are very small projects, what we're trying to do is bundle projects across communities, address different kinds of projects. So there's power, there's heat, there's transportation, there's water and sewer, there's broadband right now, and all of these are interrelated. If you live in a remote community, you're not just looking at wind turbines. You're looking at your quality of life. How does your internet work? And generally very poorly and at a very high cost. Same thing with your electricity, same thing with water availability, same thing with heat. So if we can bring those different processes and needs together, I think there are some opportunities to reduce costs across the board and provide, again, jobs and training within all of those areas, because they really, there's a lot of overlap. And researchers or consultants may see these very clear, clean silos, but when you live out there, all of these things relate to each other. And I think we all know that inherently. So that is my last slide. I want to thank everybody for the opportunity this morning, and we look forward to questions later this morning.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian and Sunny. Get our videos up here again. We got it all here. Thank you so much for that opportunity to speak. There's some questions in the Q&A that perhaps you could speak to and answer while we move on to the next one. And we'll have an opportunity to talk here during the Q&A in a couple of hours. And I'd like to move on just to our next speaker here. I'd like to introduce Chris Michellenie, who's going to talk to us about Native American and Alaska Native community roles in energy development and what is needed to ensure an equitable energy transition. So Chris is a member of the the Navajo Nation, is an attorney, engineer, and national leader, well respected by his peers, tribal and business leaders within Indian community. Indian country. Chris is the owner and founder of Michellenie PLLC, a tribal energy and legal firm based out of Washington, D.C. Chris has also founded Tosida LLC, a tribal energy development company working within Indian country. He is a co-founder of the National Intertribal Energy Council, a national tribal energy trade association. Chris recently completed a distinguished term as the Director of Office of Indian Energy within the U.S. Department of Energy. His responsibilities included working with tribal communities in Alaska and the lower 48. Prior to serving in D.C., Chris served as the general counsel and advisor to tribes, tribal energy partnerships, and non-Indian energy and business entities working in Indian country. As a former member of the Arizona House of Representatives, Chris has extensive government and legislative experience to help tribes maximize their government affairs, strategies, and relationships. Finally, Chris has also served honorably within the U.S. Marine Corps, completing 2 tours in the Persian Gulf, first in the infantry and then with reconnaissance units. He holds the rank of major. Chris, it's a pleasure to welcome you, and thank you for your time with us today.
Thank you, Bruno, and good morning, all. Thanks for having me here. In our traditional ways, we say, which means thank you for the opportunity to share a few words. My name is Chris Michellenie, and as stated, I'm from the Navajo Nation. If you know Arizona and Utah, there is a river called the Colorado that runs basically from Colorado through parts of New Mexico, Utah, and then Arizona. Where it intersects Utah and Arizona, there's a small community from that part of the Western Navajo Nation. So thank you again for having me. What I'd like to do is really just talk to you as a board member from the National Intertribal Energy Council. We have a number of efforts that we're moving towards, but in terms of NITEC, NITEC is a nonprofit national intertribal energy trade association working really to advance tribal energy policies and investment opportunities and business development within Indian country. Unlike other nonprofits, NITEC is working to become a 501c6. So it's working to really operate in the political arena, working to address a number of the policies that support tribal energy development throughout Indian country and Alaska. So for this presentation, I really just wanted to talk to a number of things. And if I may, let me ask one question to the organizers. Shall I upload my own presentation? I forget, or will the form upload it for me?
Chris, if you're able to share your screen, that would be great.
Okay.
I do have your presentation ready if you would like, though. So either option is available to you.
Tim, could you just load for me? I usually have trouble when I do it, so it would be very helpful.
Will do.
Okay, so I have a short presentation here, and a lot of it will be addressing really kind of high-level global perspectives as it relates to equitable energy transition for Native American tribes and Alaska Native villages. And then at the conclusion, and when we gather again, I'll be happy to answer questions related to this presentation. Next slide, please. So we know that our world is changing, and what we know from a number of events in our history, we had to endure and deal with issues related to the land that then address things that we had to deal with in terms of our natural resources, minerals, water, fossil resources, and now access to renewable energy elements like the sun and the wind. Then we are also looking at the separation between wealth and poverty as it relates to some of the challenges that we deal with in Indian country. Of course, education is there. Politics has been changing in terms of representation and some of the things that our country has been founded on. And then, of course, technology is changing in a way that is really supporting a lot of new innovation, disruptions to existing energy models, and also looking at new transfer into the markets that hopefully make our lives a little bit better. And then, of course, we have climate change and then COVID that really highlighted a number of the challenges that we face within our native villages and within Indian country. And so if we put it all together, we know that the things that we are dealing with is greatly affecting our world as it's progressing, as it's changing. Enough to look at how policies are being developed, generated, and pushed forward in terms of our leadership in our respective nation's capital, in our states, and then in the regions as we deal with the different energy infrastructure. And the reason why I have this up here, these particular slides, we can see at the bottom, I was in Alaska, this would have been about 2016, 17. And I took this picture at the bottom because you could see the successive generations in this picture of these members of the community here, from the youngest little one there to the elders that were part of this. And what that meant to me was is symbolic of the changing world that we are living, working through in our communities, especially with our parents and elders who have seen our world change so much. And now it's incumbent upon us to really try to address some of these differences, these inequities that we're working on. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that was posed is really, what is the nexus between climate change, these state and federal policies, and climate and energy inequities? Well, if you really think about it in terms of the work that we do in the industry, it's the linkage is the tribe, it is the village, it is the indigenous community that is the nexus between all these policies and all these efforts regarding legislation, regulation, business, industries, and markets. And that's all tied to these foundation areas like our natural resources, which then affect what our economies are and the resulting infrastructure. If we look at, for example, tribal lands throughout Indian country, we have heard a number of times the tremendous potential that tribes have in terms of being able to support not only the local, the regional, but the nation's energy needs. However, we look at the inequities and we see that it's not equal because tribes are enduring a number of challenges and setbacks, and I will get to that here shortly. And what that does is it has really a direct effect on what the economy is and the infrastructure. And there's a lot of publication out there that talks about how do we address this. At least in the energy field, from what I've seen, it really is a function of infrastructure that is there then to support in the cases of building healthy economies and healthy businesses and supporting the elements of job and revenue creation. And so whether or not a tribal leadership council entity is looking at the infrastructure, that then has a direct effect on all these other areas. So that then stems into politics and government, because we know that there's relationships that have to be addressed to look at a number of movements forward, whether it's dealing with key incentives, whether it's dealing with partnerships, or looking at developing the plans and programs and policies that get back to the needs of the tribe. Then, of course, the disruption market changes that are developing fast because we are in a modern world related to technology and innovation. And at the center of all of that is the tribe. So the nexus between these issues with climate change resulting in state and federal policies and climate and energy inequities is the tribe. The one difference is that that we need to do is take a look at educating not only our industries and our partners, but also what we say from my tribe, which is educating the outside. And that, and I'll get to that here in a second. Next slide, please. So a question also that I wanted to answer is, what is needed to ensure an equitable energy transition? Well, here we look at a couple of things, and based upon the work and history and some of the experience I've seen throughout Indian country, including Alaska, foundation work in developing the solutions require some basic steps. Here I've listed 5 in general. First is identifying threats, challenges, and barriers to tribal communities. Those are things like climate and renewable energy threat assessments. Those are things that we take a look at as part of the feasibility. But if we're looking on the scale of inequities, social and environmental justice, then we have to look at these threat assessments to see really what this baseline is. And from my work in government, the best solutions come from some source of knowledge, some source of research that says, here are the information that now we can begin to develop and formulate a plan to find solutions towards. The second thing is really including inclusive governance of energy transitions. So what does that mean? It really means, if we just single it to one word, it's governance, is the ability to be a part of the decision-making process. That includes consultation, that includes these notice requirements, and that has a direct impact on the policy and legislative development. And so when we defer, when we allow others to make decisions for our tribal and native villages, then we are not really owning, much less participating in the development of a, sometimes I've heard it as these economic market, even these trends, these mega trends that have influence our social, economic, and even climate conditions and environments. And so governance, meaning being an active, decisive decision maker, these are the terms that are all incorporated in terms of leadership. Okay. The third point I wanted to make is ensuring equity and ownership. Now that we've progressed over the years and over the decades to this point in Indian country's history, we look at if you do a short, research or short study, you can see different timeframes within the United States, and as with respect to its energy policies, with respect to tribes, and you can start to see these different periods and these different eras. Of recently, we've looked at really a movement, and some have called it the self-determination era. Some would call it sovereignty. I'm sure somebody smarter than me is probably coining the phrases for the 21st century. But what it really comes down to is, once the tribes begin to implement their sovereign decisions to participate, to develop, to make their own decisions, then these principles of equity and ownership start coming out. And this is now been, I would say, ongoing for the last 2 decades. So we see more and more of that. And we see that more in the structuring and the development of energy projects, energy policies, and we see it in the the new wave of professionals who are working to support tribal equity and ownership. Now, the balance, I think, is finding it, the relationships between, say, for example, the old energy, economic and industry relationships with now things that are more on the climate change, NGO, sustainability kind of efforts, and incorporate that with grassroots work that's being done. I think this administration, and especially with our new director, Walea Johns, I think we're going to see a lot of balancing that kind of brings in this equity and ownership as it relates to modernization of projects in Indian country. The fourth thing, it really goes back to a saying that I learned, is education. And I learned this from my elders, in particular, my mother, who talked about really the purpose of these positions. Rather than talking to me about, fundamentals of leadership and talking about, these obligations, she simply just said, look, son, educate them all, because they don't know. People don't know about the conditions that we are enduring, some of the challenges that we're dealing with, and folks need to understand in their languages. And so an example of that is, I'm an engineer by trade. That was my first love. And when I left the military, I went back to graduate school, and I discovered that I was completely ignorant with respect to the language of law and business. And so I went back and I learned through law school that there is a language of government, and that's law. And so through that process, what I learned was that policymaking, drafting legislation is a different language as it relates to what we might see in the communities and what we might see in our work, say, on the ground or in the trenches. And I learned firsthand, painfully, that while I made recommendation as a member back then as the Intertribal Council of Arizona, that attorneys and high-powered consultants and lobbyists in DC took a red pen and redlined all our work and repackaged it and put it before Congress in 2001 and said, this is what you really want, tribes. And what that meant was two things. One, I lost control in conveying what the tribes really wanted from Arizona, but it also meant that the folks who were redrafting that legislation did not understand and therefore were ignorant to the solutions that we needed in Indian country. And so that was a little inside view of Chris. That was the genesis or reason why I went back to law school and said, I need to learn this language so that doesn't happen again. And so I hold that. And the way we say that in Navajo is means educate them all, is kind of a process that we need to do in ensuring equitable energy transition. The last thing I want to say is, and I think I've heard some of this from Brian and Sunny, is really a policy priority that we identified, and it's probably not anything new, but basically what we learned through our work at DOE was we need to secure financial resources to compete. That is the #1 policy priority, at least when we were working at DOE, and what I've seen over the last few years in getting energy projects off the ground. Because a lot of work is being done up front, but to really initiate, whether it's a pre-development or development or even closure of a deal, there is a need to secure financial resources to compete with not only the markets, but also to compete to support our needs in terms of providing a better life for Indian country and Alaska. The last thing I'll say about this is a quick story. At DOE, we had these leadership meetings, and I spoke to then the Secretary Moniz, and what we talked about was really a lot of good work that was being done by DOE throughout the world. And didn't want to be selfish and didn't want to really kind of echo it too loudly, but going back to that second principle of educating them all, I shared with them the leadership, the senior leadership at DOE, and said, look, if you took 10% of the 10% that you're giving to other regions of the world and focus on undeveloped countries within the United States, you could see a tremendous boost in not only the infrastructure, but also the economy, the health and welfare. And then you could see a resurgence in rural communities throughout the United States. But we need resources to do that. And that was a principal message that, I was able to carry and share with leadership at the DOE level. We need to do that throughout our respective networks and communities. Next slide, please. So,
Can I give a 2-minute warning, Chris?
Sure.
Thank you.
Almost done here. So with regards to how American Indians, Alaska Natives play a role in this, really one is to organize for change. Two is to build strategic relationships, develop those strategic plans, acquire those financial resources I spoke about, and then recruit fearless leadership and then innovate and change. Because the world is changing, you need to progress, I think, as well as to keep up with the changes. And so this picture here is a leader that sadly we lost due to COVID. And I went to law school with her, and I miss her a lot because she had taught me about the strengths of being fearless in advocating for Indian country. Next slide, please. So I think I'm almost done here. The bottom line is really making a plan, and to use language that I learned in the Marines, what is a plan? A plan is a common basis for change. That's it. So how do we keep, how do we make it useful? One, we make the plan, we implement or execute, we review and revise the plan. And when we revise it, we then circle back and begin to enact it. And key to all of this, again, what is that nexus? Is tribal leadership. It is the leadership of those folks who are vested with what we're looking for in determining these respective outcomes. Next, please. Lastly, I think this is my last slide. So what are some of the results that are happening as we speak? One, we're securing investments. We're developing this equity for tribal energy development. We're now creating ownership and equity opportunities. We're promoting and supportive innovative technology applications. We're tracking federal and state and energy legislation. And we're starting to address in the weeds things that are tied to regulatory burdens. So lower 48, we're dealing with NEPA processes, obtaining right-of-way authorities, defining workable solutions, and we're looking to levelizing the tax playing field. So this all requires help from the communities at all levels. It also requires professionals within Indian country to support this, but it also requires other partners from outside Indian country, and that is the energy professionals, industries, and the federal and state governments. So I think that is the conclusion. Let me see. Yep, there it is. So I want to just thank our hosts, and I want to thank everyone for giving me an opportunity to share a few words, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and educate them all. I think is great wisdom from your mother. I think we can carry away with us. Thank you for sharing that. I'd also ask you to direct your attention to the question and answer there in case some come up as a result of your talk. Thank you. I'd like to next move on for our last keynote before the break. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Elizabeth Doris, who's going to be talking with us this morning about energy efficiency in the global energy transition and how rural communities can equitably transform their energy systems. So Liz is a senior advisor on energy justice at NREL here, but she's currently on detail from NREL to the US DOE Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy as the Senior Advisor on Energy Justice. So she's been at NREL since 2005, but since 2015, she's been a laboratory program manager for state, local, and tribal governments, where she's responsible for developing and directing all aspects of NREL's relationship with these audiences and coordinating these activities across the lab. Liz, glad to have you here today. Thanks for taking this.
Thanks so much, Bruno. And can you hear me okay and see my slides?
Yes, see it all. Thank you.
Oh, look at that. Actually, a little bit of a miracle. Well, it's really, really difficult to follow Sunny and Brian and then Chris. So I am just really honored to be here today, and I am committing not to run us too far into the break. Because I know where I'm sitting here. But I did want to take a few minutes and talk about, and thanks for the invite, to talk about energy efficiency in transition, and in particular in rural communities. And you may be looking at this slide wondering just how tone deaf I am to the ask that was made of me. But in fact, I put this here because this is one of NREL's stock opening slides, the National Renewable Energy Lab down in Golden. And I think that people often think that our work is really around the cities and the urban areas, and we do a lot of work in those areas and in suburban areas. And we do that because they use a lot of energy and they have a lot of complex challenges. But that's not all we do. Oh, I can't flip. That's not a very dramatic flip. And so we also do a lot of work all around the nation, in rural, in suburban, in all kinds of areas where we look at different kinds of challenges. And this is a sample of some of those, and you'll see up there in our Arctic state, we have our blue dots have taken over. You can't even see much of Alaska up there. But we do quite a bit of work, and we have a huge, not a huge, but we have a solid and dedicated team, many of whom are on this line, including Bruno, and who work in this area and have a lot of unique experience in rural areas. And it is from that experience and my own experience working in that, supporting the Office of Indian Energy and DOE's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office as well, that I'm going to speak today. So I'm hoping to pack the NREL punch here. When we think about communities, we tend to, I'm going to say something that's totally heretical here to start off. We tend to think of them all the same way. We go in with these same considerations about individual context. And these have changed over the years as the mission at NREL has really evolved from just technology development to technology integration into the technical system to technology integration into the energy system writ large, right? Which includes, surprise, human beings and other decision makers. So these have really evolved about this is what we basically use. We talk about culture, so local culture, and we're not just talking about, if you want them all or if you buy all your stuff online. We're talking about how the community interacts and how the community sees energy as a part of what it is that they do in their daily life or not, right? So to what extent it's important. We also talk about logistics, and I think I actually might have learned this from an example Brian Hirsch gave me when he was at NREL a long time ago. But the roads example in Alaska is the one that I use all the time when I'm speaking around, how do you get large-scale clean energy technologies into communities when the roads are closed, or when you have to, in this part of the country, we have to go underneath overpasses and things like that. So those logistical challenges that happen in communities that are pretty tactical, but really important to consider when you're thinking about resources. Because if we start from a place with just clean energy resources, and there are a ton of NREL and other tools that can help you think about clean energy resources and what's available, and other labs and other organizations have those tools as well. If you think about it just from that perspective, you're trying to solve a wicked non-technical problem with a singularly technical solution based on resource, and that we have found, we have proof that does not work. And I think I'm saying mostly the choir here on that front. We also look, and Chris talked a little bit about this, around energy governance, so the current structure and also the structure of what the community wants in the future. So what that structure might look in the future and how that might affect clean energy. And then financial, and the other speakers hit on this really hard, and I totally agree. The financial mechanisms and the way that they fit together has been a pretty major challenge for clean energy, particularly in rural areas, that creates a lot of challenges around transaction costs, right? So having to figure out how to do it every time. Brian was talking about that as well. I think Sunny mentioned it too. When we're talking about energy efficiency, which is what I was specifically asked to speak to, in the rural context, generally when we talk about energy efficiency, which is where I started my career before Renewables, we talk about the benefits of comfort and indoor quality, air quality. And then we talk about reduced individual cost and volatility. We talk a ton around, over the long term with energy efficiency, you're looking at less bulk pricing for individuals, right? They both go down, or at least stay flat. And then grid flexibility. So when you have a lot of energy efficiency in a community, you can address some of the challenges around load balancing, for example, in a larger community. If you translate those to a rural community, or maybe it's not even translation, it's more like if you come from a basis of a rural community, all of those things become way more extreme. And that is something that we've really borne out, we've learned over and over again, as we have done more work in these areas over the last 20 or 30 years. And so instead of just, comfort, it's about life safety, right? So in hot and humid climates, we talk about air conditioning load and whether or not you're going to have loss of light from air conditioning, which we've experienced recently in some tropical storms down south. And in the Arctic regions, we talk about freezing and darkness and all of those things that are really critical to people's, not just their quality of life, but their actual lives and their economic lives. So all of these different things sort of start to become very extreme in rural areas. We also, I want to talk about the difference between individual savings with energy efficiency and in rural communities, the benefits to the whole community of energy costs. And this, I think, is pretty extreme in remote areas of Alaska and other Arctic areas where you're flying in fuel, right? So the whole community has to, or has the opportunity to, I guess, pitch in for that. And so you have interesting governance structures there just to bounce back to that. But also you have a whole community risk instead of an individual risk or an individual benefit for clean energy. And this really gets at this next point too, which is system flexibility. So can you use energy efficiency to provide you some flexibility in different systems? And I think I speak about that on the next slide. Systems are connected everywhere, right? Like every community is a part of connected systems. And this point was made by earlier speakers as well, in rural areas and in Arctic areas, those systems are much more connected. This is just a visual that I made from the SEMA sort of connected lifelines philosophy, which is, you can't have, I think Brian spoke about this, you can have lack of internet and expect for smooth functioning electricity, right? Like those things they're so interconnected now. And in rural areas, when you're thinking about costs and benefits of energy efficiency, it is all of these things that connect that you can really create benefit for when you integrate energy efficiency. And that's just exacerbated in a rural area, that connectedness, which is really beautiful, is also a big challenge for, or a big opportunity for energy efficiency to have even more benefit to the community if you can access it in a way that matters for the community. And you actually can't really, from where I'm standing at a national lab, you have to do that through partnerships on the ground. And the first presentation was talking a lot about champions, right? And needing to have a champion that is on the ground, that is participating, that is carrying this work forward. And so what we've been working on over the last few years is really working towards valuing that local expertise and paying for it, valuing that local expertise with technical expertise to try to get to solutions that work for actual communities. I have an example of this, which is a tool, and I'm not advocating for this tool, just an example that I use sometimes, called Engage, which comes out of the Department of Energy's Energy Transition Initiative, and it's developed at NREL. And it's really a tool where it's an example of this valuing local expertise. It's highly accessible. So it's very, very granular technical information, but highly accessible on computers, on disks, right? In pictures, and people can use the tool to understand what the implications of different energy decisions are. You know, there's a whole host of these types of tools. The point I'm trying to make here is that you have to be able to develop that, have that capacity on the ground, and it has to be ongoing. And that gets a little bit to Chris's point about funding that in an ongoing way, which I think, you know, I work for the National Renewable Energy Lab. I'm not going to make policy commentary, but the support for long-term champions is something that the data shows increases the viability of clean energy technologies over the long term. And you need the long term. So this is a graphic that I unceremoniously lifted from Benjamin Sovacool's paper, which he lifted from an Arnold paper from the early 90s, 1991, that talks about the length of time of engagement. And so one thing I would add in terms of the champions and the financial stability pieces that we've heard about in the other presentations, that's just part of the great comments that the speakers made, is longevity. So support over the long term can enable the transformations, the clean energy transformations that a community might need to really get the benefits of the cost savings and the comfort benefits from efficiency and renewables in a sort of larger sense. And it takes a really, really long time, even in a small community. And I think that's because, you know, even if you say you replace the whole system, if you don't have someone who knows how to use that or is a champion for using it, things really start to fall apart when technology falls apart, which is also something that we talked about earlier. And I think there's also an angle here. I didn't think of it while I was putting the slides together, but I really appreciated Chris's comments around the ownership, the self-determination, and I think that's true. Sometimes communities call that democratization, right? But like it has a whole different level of meaning in a tribal context. And I think that that I won't pretend to understand, but if we can get ownership, in order to get to ownership of that facility, we need to be able to have long-term capacity support to get to that, to get the community to a place where it is ready to accept that. Some communities already are, but like typically we need to see that. So that's just sort of the summary here that I want to talk about quickly is high-end energy efficiency or high market share energy efficiency transition in rural environments is like totally different than in other areas, which, you know, I'm talking to an Alaska-based audience and an Arctic-based audience, so I'm sure that's not a surprise. Really, really super important to think about its interconnectedness, which gets at this challenge of finance structures and fund flow being from different areas and the challenges of that and the potential transaction costs. Really thinking about the local stakeholders in a long-term and cohesive way of sort of how do you build capacity that is going to last and leave behind, right? And like never came in, like actually stemmed from the community, and is sort of augmented with external if needed support. And then also expanding in there, and I don't know if I hit on this much, but you know, it used to be that we would work with utility companies and whatever governance function was functioning as a regulator, to the extent there was one, and that was the win, right? Like working with those people would help us engage clean energy. The whole clean energy system over the last decade has completely changed, and we have wildly different stakeholders, community groups, religious organizations, individual people wanting a role, having a role in the electricity and energy sectors. And so really, it's not just about identifying your champion and growing your champion, it's about identifying and growing multiple champions. And so that's a really important piece, like both growing that pool and supporting it in the long term, and then that long-term transition. So those are the things that I just wanted to sort of type in and offer a lot of support for the previous speakers and their points, because I think those were amazing presentations and had these great, wonderful points about long-term champions. And I just wanted to support that with the work that we've been doing, and we've seen that on a large scale across all of our rural work, and also specifically in the Arctic work. So I think, oh, nope, I'm not done. Just kidding. I have more time. And this is a big deal for me today. I should have remembered this. So we've been trying to come up with ways where we could do this at the community level, right? Like take all of those 4 things and figure out a way to have federal and national laboratory support be really useful for communities, instead of sometimes the reputation it has of sort of dropping in. And so we came up with this project with the Department of Energy. It's called the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project, ETIP. And we just released the names of the communities that we're partnering with in the first round today. I believe the secretary actually released them. And so it's very exciting. There's a video online. And this is multi-laboratory, multi-department at the department, right? Trying to lower transaction costs for communities to access by presenting a unified threat, so that communities don't have to access 20 different points to get the answers they're looking for. And so it's also long-term, so the technical assistance lasts for a long time. That's built on some great program design mechanisms that we learned a lot from the Office of Indian Energy. And then also it has a partnership approach. So it includes stakeholder development organizations that are on the ground that can help bolster this longer term capacity. I'm not going to stand here and argue to you that this is the end of where these technical assistance programs are going. This is just another step towards really taking what we've learned about the importance of on the ground champion development and long-term support, and really trying to push that forward to its next natural development. If you want more information on this program and its second round, which will be coming up soon, for remote and islanded communities, please don't hesitate. We have a lot of people who would be happy to talk to you about it for too long, but that won't be before your break. And so I just want to thank everyone again, and offer up my email and contact information if you have any questions for me. Really excited for the rest of the day. Thanks, Bruno.
Thank you, Liz. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sunny, for kicking this off. As Liz just mentioned, we're coming up on a break here, and we're going to have time to revisit with all these presenters here when we do the guided panel discussion at 11:20 Alaska time. So we're going to take a 30-minute break and reconvene here in 30 minutes, which is 10:30 Alaska time. And appreciate all of you and look forward to the continuing discussions and presentations, and just keep this energy going. Thank you all so much. See you in 30. Thank you again for joining us here at this Arctic Sustainable Energy Research Conference, where we are discussing research and community needs in the context of this global energy transition. I'd like to just direct your attention over to the Q&A box here. This is a place where if you have questions as we go, throw them in here. We're going to answer them as we can. If there's something that sort of pops up that may be best left for the guided panel discussion, perhaps we could throw it in at that point, but we're going to try to answer it as we can. So for those of you watching, please, if you have questions, throw them in there and we will answer them as we go. I'd like also to mention that we are broadcasting this conference through Facebook Live this week. We thought it'd be a bandwidth saving mechanism to maximize the number of people who like to hear these messages. So if you would like to share this, if you'd like to find this, just find this on Facebook by searching for Arctic Research Commission, and you'll see it at the top of the screen. I just checked it a few minutes ago, and it's right there. And lastly, we're going to, just to ensure that we get to the full 40 minutes of the discussion today, because that's really where the meat is in the dialogue here. I'm going to try to break in and give the next two panelists a 2 or 3 minute notification that that we're closing in this allotted 25-minute speaking time. So I want to check with Carolyn here real quick to see if we're ready for our next presenter.
We're going to have Mike Michellenie disconnect and reconnect here, and so hopefully that will solve our issue.
Okay.
Sorry for the delay.
That's okay. We'll put this on pause for just a minute. We are, a year and change into COVID, and thank you all for your patience and understanding for these kinds of things.
If anybody is having issues with bandwidth, we are also broadcasting this simultaneously on Facebook Live. So if you go to the U.S. Arctic Research Commission's Facebook page, did you just announce this? And am I re-announcing it?
That's okay. It's worth re-announcing.
Okay. I was on the phone trying to find Mike. So now they've heard it twice. Great. And I think that we're trying to pick up Mike by phone. Do we have him?
We have Mike. Mike, you should be able to talk. I can't find your video on here, but we will keep trying. I believe that Tim has backup of presentation. So if you have any slides, we should be able to share that on our end.
Yes, I can pull up those slides. This is Tim.
Excellent. Well, how about while you do that, I give a little intro to Mike.
Let's make sure. Okay? Can Mike talk yet? Mike, can you hear us and can you speak?
So Mike, I'm asking you to unmute. You should be able to accept that.
Can you hear me, Carolyn?
There you are.
Yay.
We can hear you now.
Okay, can you see me?
We cannot see you yet, but Tim has your slides pulled up, Mike. So if you want to talk through them.
well, this is easier on everybody's eyes anyhow.
Well, while we're here, can I just jump in and introduce you there, Mike? Just we had a little stutter step getting in here. So I'll just say, well, thank you, Mike, by the way, for coming and for being here. Let's just welcome Mike Michellenie, who joins the Arctic Energy Office from the Office of International Affairs, where here he serves as a senior policy advisor with responsibility for Arctic issues, as you'll see. Prior to his service here at DOE, he served as a policy and strategy analyst for the Undersecretary of Navy with responsibility for Arctic and nuclear issues. And he served as a professional staff member in the U.S. House of Representatives. And today he's going to share the Arctic Energy Office perspectives on existing and future climate energy related legislation, and also executive orders and what they'll mean for remote and Arctic communities. So Mike, thanks for being here, and I'm going to hand this off to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Bruno. I appreciate it. And if we go to the next slide, it's my honor to speak here in front of both the USARC, now under Chairman Kennedy, and of course my colleagues at CCHRC and ASEP. The guiding policy documents for the United States in the Arctic region remain the 2014 National Strategy for the Arctic region and the Arctic Research and Policy Act as amended. These set the guidance for both federal agencies, for those doing business with the government, and everybody expecting to deal with both other countries in the Arctic and across the region. The previous administration did not update the National Strategy for the Arctic region, but as a 2014 document, it is, I would not be surprised to see it updated at some point in the next 4 years to reflect the changes both in the Arctic and in the global security situation. The Arctic Research and Policy Act, perhaps best known among cartographers for establishing the U.S. Arctic as different from the solar astronomical Arctic, remains in place, but there are several proposals to update all or part of it, including the recently introduced Arctic Policy Act and a number of other proposals. I cannot comment on whether those will make it to see the light of day or not, but these are the basis for everything we're doing going forward. And from the National Strategy for the Arctic region, flow the various departmental Arctic strategies, the recent Department of Defense Arctic strategy, the Army and Navy and Air Force Arctic strategies, and the Homeland Security Department Arctic strategy as well. So next slide, please. The other pillar of U.S. Arctic policy is our membership of the Arctic Council. Most of you are familiar with, but consists of the 8 Arctic states and a number of observers from both transnational organizations, indigenous organizations, and non-Arctic states. And Iceland is currently the chairman and hands over to Russia in May at the ministerial in Reykjavik, Iceland. Secretary Blinken and the Russian foreign minister are both committed to attending in person, despite the global issues going on. So as a signal of the importance of the Arctic Council to the United States and to the other Arctic countries. We have not seen the Russian chairmanship agenda yet, but we have seen hints in various publications and documents, and their chairmanship is likely to focus on support for energy infrastructure development. Of course, we're all very familiar with the Russian investments in Yamal and Sakhalin and the rest of their petrochemical gas complex that's been established, that's sending tankers through the Bering Strait on an increasing basis, that's funding the development of military and other industrial sites along the Northern Sea route. Russia is likely to double down on this in their chairmanship agenda, but to paint it as a positive for their own Arctic residents and, of course, the rest of the world. And they're likely to claim that this massive investment in the hydrocarbon complex is benefiting their Arctic communities, despite perhaps some evidence to the contrary. For the Department of Energy, we primarily participate with our colleagues at ASEP and NREL. We finance the ARENA program, the Arctic Remote Energy Network Academy program, through the Sustainable Development Working Group. And despite the change in chairmanship, we expect to host the U.S. session in Fairbanks in 2022. But the larger question for people practicing Arctic policy and working and investing in the Arctic is to what extent the other 7 states will counter this narrative of hydrocarbon investment equals a happy and prosperous Arctic. And we'll see in some of the later slides the consensus developing around the ongoing energy transition that is both accelerating and being accelerated through various actions in the government and worldwide. So next slide, please. Of particular interest to myself and probably to many of you is the maritime domain of the Arctic, an incredibly increasing area of interest, of critical importance, of course, to communities who depend on access to the sea or from the sea or through the sea for people fishing and working. But the Arctic maritime domain, of course, the Arctic being partially defined by its common maritime basin, but the Arctic maritime domain will be a driver of energy investment. Now, of course, in Russia, we see it as a driver of their hydrocarbon complex, but globally, the marine energy transition is coming. HFO and diesel, which are the mainstays of maritime transportation, the transition is coming, and it's likely to lead to cleaner fuels and to growing use of electric technology. You saw a recent push to possibly deploy electric ferries of Alaska. 2 of our Arctic allies, Norway and Denmark, are leading this space. The United States is actively engaging, as I know. Some might say we're playing catch up. That's fine, as long as we get there. But we will see more and more of investment in the maritime domain, both seaside or ship side, as mentioned there, and then on the shore side or the port side. The president's budget contained $5 billion for port decarbonization in the United States. It is, I think, within the Arctic, where, of course, ports are both harder to come by and required to be more resilient because of lack of because of the lack of alternatives. We don't have the opportunity to say, oh, Baltimore's closed, we'll go to Norfolk, or Long Beach is crowded, we'll go up to San Francisco. There are no alternative ports in a realistic sense for most of the Arctic. The investment in ports will probably accelerate, and we have the opportunity when developing or redeveloping ports to make sure that we get it right the first time, to include microgrids, to include greater resiliency through distributed power, and of course to reduce carbon emissions to the lowest possible point while maintaining an active and thriving port. As I mentioned, new ports could start at a zero carbon balance if we play our parts. The Arctic Energy Office, working with some of our national labs, has some real looking forward to the opportunity to work with ports in Alaska and across the Arctic on ways to make this happen, building on some additional pre-existing work from our laboratories in this space. And I'm happy to talk about that more later. Next slide, please. Terrestrial clean energy. So I put DOE is pushing for carbon neutrality by 2050, but not just DOE. It's the President's Executive Order 14008. Carbon neutrality by 2050, a carbon neutral energy sector or electricity sector by 2035. These are aggressive targets. I think there's no debate about that, but they're vitally important. The fight to reduce the acceleration of climate change, to preserve what's left of the environment while maintaining economically secure communities and of course resilient communities is vitally important. You know, in the Arctic and especially in the North American Arctic, Alaska, I think the primary way this will come about is through increased deployment of microgrids. Building off the work of our laboratories, NREL and ASEP, very heavily represented here, and others, of course. Increasing use of microgrids will allow disparate renewable sources to be integrated, stored, and managed. I mean, you know the challenges. You know the challenges. So many communities are relying on a single point sources for electricity and thermal heating. Replacing those with renewables requires the ability to store and to distribute in a much more efficient way. Microgrids are coming. It's a priority of the department. It's an area where we see lots of opportunity to make these happen and to involve communities in that. We published a few pieces on the AEO website for anybody who I'm giving away my last slide, but if anybody wants to go there, we talked about the importance of bringing the community in both selecting and learning, having the opportunity to operate and maintain the equipment. Of course, so many communities, you know, repair and replacement is not even a possibility during much of the year. Having a community that's comfortable, that's qualified, and that's invested in their own energy solutions is a vital part of getting to the carbon neutrality by 2050. What does that mean for the investments that are chosen? Again, I don't think anybody is saying communities need to follow one line. In fact, that's the opposite. But it will mean that DOE support is across the board on renewable and perhaps non-traditional energy. I list some of those below. Hydrogen, the hydrogen economy is growing rapidly. Hydrokinetics, whether that is run-of-the-river power or some other form of hydropower. Smart buildings and advanced buildings. Again, that CCHRC does so well. I wish I could drop CCHRC across the Arctic. Bruno probably wouldn't like that so much, but I would like that to happen. It's so much a part of the solution. Energy districts, both for thermal heating and geothermal deployment, and then possibly small and micro reactors for communities who wish those, and for industrial sites. They really are part of the potential solution. And DOE remains very much in support of small and micro reactor development. It is a tool worth having in the toolkit for so many communities and industrial facilities. Next slide, please. This is a pretty straightforward. I mean, you all see climate change accelerating, the challenge of community relocation, infrastructure replacement, and maintaining economically survivable communities. We are well aware of that at AEO and across the Department of Energy. We want to be part of solutions, but you know, one of the main solutions is to attempt to arrest climate change before the worst of it is baked in. So the commitment to carbon neutrality, the commitment to clean energy is a vital part of that on the global strategic level, and on the regional and local level, making sure our communities are able to thrive. I think the next 4 years will also see a focus on resilience. Too much of our infrastructure is a single source, is vulnerable both to environmental and to man-made crises or human-enabled crises. You know, we saw over the winter the destruction of infrastructure in communities leading to adverse impacts across the board, primarily through accidents and ill fortune. One can only imagine that in a situation where there were adverse actions taken, the impact to infrastructure would be even worse. The time is now, and I think much effort will be put into cataloging and incentivizing the resilience of our Arctic infrastructure in Alaska and in our friends and allies. Vitally important. There are a lot of people working on this, including our laboratories and people in Alaska. We can talk quite a bit more about that. And that's infrastructure across the board, not just energy generation and distribution, but economic infrastructure, transportation, of course, our ports and harbors, airports, etc. Next slide, please. Well, I thought NREL was going to publish this. My apologies to Ms. Doris, but I get to announce that the Secretary of Energy announced the ETIP awards this morning. I put her quote here in very large points. I don't need to repeat it. It's very exciting, very good for Alaska. And there are 5 Alaska projects that were announced. If you go to the next slide, and you'll see that distribution of DOE interest in some of the ETIPs that were selected, including maritime infrastructure, maritime energy transition, microgrids, diesel, moving from diesel forward to hydrokinetics, you know, the Sitka project and the Wainwright project. These are all perfect examples of the slides. I drafted my slides already, and I was waiting for the official announcement. It came out. I was like, boom. These announcements talk more about where the department's priorities are in the Arctic than I could. Please take a look at these. I'm sure many of the implementers and creators and maintainers of these projects are here on the call. I want to hear more from you guys later during this conference. But these kind of say it all. Again, maritime, port, hydro, renewable, microgrids, it's all right here. It's all going to happen, and it will continue to happening. These are the, pun intended, the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure there will be many more to come over the coming years as communities recognize these changes in the Arctic and as the government works to help navigate those changes. Next slide, please. And some of you may be wondering, what the heck is the Arctic Energy Office? The Arctic Energy Office was recreated last year to lead cross-cutting operations in the Arctic to address energy science. Well, that's right there. It's to coordinate the Department of Energy's Arctic activities. The department is enormous, and there are lots of people doing tremendous work. And our job is to provide a single point of access for people in the Arctic, both in Alaska and across the region, to the Department of Energy, and to coordinate within the department so that our program offices and laboratories and leadership have a picture of what we're doing across the region. So we're located on the UAF campus. Our first employee, Dr. Hevner, is in Alaska right now, literally opening the doors, soft opening. Soft opening the doors. We'll have a fancier opening later this summer, I'm sure. We are available to assist, whether you need trying to learn more about DOE and what it's doing, or to learn more about what our international partners are doing. I kind of lead our international cooperation. Our director is Dr. George Rowe, formerly of ASEP. We have publications and articles on our website. We have a very active and funny Twitter feed, and we are available to help. We are small, but we are here, and we are representing DOE's Arctic equities across the board. So that is the end of my presentation. I appreciate everybody's patience with the technical problems. I would like to say that it's my honor to precede Director Johns of the Indian Energy Office, whom I'm sure will speak much more cogently on what I have discussed. But thank you, everybody, very much. And thank you to the staff of ASEP and CCHRC and USARC for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for your time and for sticking with us through all of this and for your presentation. This is absolutely fantastic. And for the introduction to Director Walea Johns. I'm honored to introduce her here in just a moment. So Walea Johns is the Senior Advisor to U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs. So she's a member of the Navajo Diné tribe and comes from northeastern Arizona. Her background is in renewable energy and community organizing, and having co-funded Native Renewables, a nonprofit that builds renewable energy tribal capacity while addressing energy access, pertinent to our conversation today. Her work with the Black Mesa Water Coalition and Navajo Green Economy Coalition has led to groundbreaking legislative victories for groundwater protection, green jobs, and environmental justice. So Walea, it's an honor to have you here today. Thank you for being here. And can you hear us? Great.
Hi, I did it. I made it. I'm so
Nailed
excited. All right. Hi, everyone. Yate. I am Walea Johns. I'm the Senior Advisor for the Office of Indian Energy, and I'm from northeastern Arizona, Navajo Nation. I'm Diné, and just like Chris Deschitney spoke earlier, I want to extend my greetings to you all and all of the organizers, everyone who's listening near and far, and all of the presenters today. And I just wanted to also recognize all the tribal nations, tribal members, tribal entities that have been I guess, involved with power and energy, trying to troubleshoot some of the main issues in our communities as tribal nations. So I actually wasn't going to do a slide presentation, but I created one just to kind of, because I felt like since everyone had PowerPoint presentations, maybe I would be the only one without one, but I did kind of pull something together really quick, and I can share that right now. Hang on. How do I do this? Okay. Can you all see my screen? Am I doing that right?
Yep, we can see it. You can just do your slideshow from the beginning or down at the bottom.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
Can you see that? All right. So if you're not familiar with the Office of Indian Energy, we're about 10 years old, and we actually, there's been many great leaders that pulled together the need for an office to help specifically address energy issues with tribes. And one of those leaders is on the call today, Chris Deschitney. He was a former director. And so I've been able to speak with all of the former directors, and from Tracy LeBeau to Pilar Thomas to Chris Deschitney and Kevin Frost. And because I wanted to understand the history and the initiatives that were created at their term and how it's been evolving as the Office of Indian Energy. But we formed to promote in Indian and tribal energy development, efficiency and use, to reduce or stabilize energy costs, enhance and strengthen Indian tribal energy and economic infrastructure related to natural resource development and electrification, and bring electrical power and service to Indian land and homes. So this was under the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and charged by, did I just move that? Sorry. And this is our mission, is to maximize the development and deployment of strategic energy solutions that benefit tribal communities by providing American Indians and Alaska Natives with the knowledge, skills, and resources needed to implement successful strategic energy solutions. We fill our charter by providing financial assistance through competitive grants, technical assistance, and also education outreach. And through these initiatives, we have been able to support over 150 projects throughout Indian country. A lot of funding has gone to deployment and putting material in the ground, with assisting tribes to achieve their energy goals. And we have provided also in partnership strategic energy planning processes for tribes and technical assistance throughout Indian country. And so we serve 574 tribal nations, Alaska Native villages and corporations. And as an entity that's within Department of Energy, we also have partners through labs, but also all of the different departments and partnerships that you all probably have been receiving grant funding or support through energy efficiency, renewable energy department, and fossil energy. And so there's a wealth of programs and funding opportunities, and there will be more as well. And we also are really focused on education and outreach. And this has been one area that since I've been in this role that I'm eager to be creative in the way that we are doing this and supporting existing efforts in tribal nations, and working with also schools and students on how to better implement energy education and capacity building within our communities and tribes. So let's see. I don't know if you know, but we have 3 staff in Alaska. We have an office in Anchorage, Alaska. And so these are our 3 staff. And if you didn't know, now you know. Givy, Alan, and Dan have been supporting with technical assistance and helping me to understand the lay of the land of Alaska and the needs that are there, and introducing me to a number of Alaska Native villages, tribal governments, and corporations on learning about the challenges and the barriers with energy development, some proposed ideas, and the need for internal capacity building. So I'm happy to discuss more about specifically our goals for Alaska, and how also hear your feedback on how we can be of best support there in Alaska, and also all the other partners that have spoken previously to me, before me. So let's see. Since I've been in this new role, it's an honor to be appointed, and I think, as mentioned, I come from a really rural area on Navajo, and grew up 2 miles from a coal mining operation. And energy to me has been a big part of my upbringing. And I feel like there's also this part of me that has at a young age that wanted to see how we can really sustain ourselves as a family, as a community. And I think I still carry that with me into this work. Is our goal is to empower 574 American Indian and Alaska Native nations to lead the transition to 100% clean energy. Our priorities since I've been in this role are to build the Office of Indian Energy's capacity internally with our staff and the programs, and spending some time in these past few months to get a sense of what we've been up to for the past 10 years, and also where are we going and what is still needed, and hoping to build our office and our programs and expand. The other priority is the nation to nation trust building that is so needed in all of the federal agencies. And we just hosted a tribal consultation session 2 weeks ago. And I think it was April, gosh, I forgot, April 7th, maybe it's two Fridays ago. And it was really wonderful to hear. We had about 40 tribes participate. And yes, that's not too much. I mean, we still have a long ways to go in our outreach efforts. And that's something that we're working on, is building a whole outreach strategy so that we can connect with each tribal nation on understanding their energy needs and how we can be of support in with the resources that we have, but also connect tribal nations to other departments and other agencies that can get us to this kind of 100% clean energy vision, but also to a sustainable, self-reliant, self-determination future. And I think that's embedded in, tribal nations or federal Indian law and policies is, that support for that trust responsibility support for tribes is to get to that place. And so I really am excited about how we are continuing to, within DOE, integrate the importance of our federal responsibility to tribes and building trust, but also making sure that we aren't just hosting one consultation session, that there's going to be many. And we also are going to be hosting listening sessions on various topics. And one that's coming up is in the next couple of weeks is on May 3rd, I believe, from 2:30 to 4:30 Eastern Time. We are co-hosting a roundtable discussion on funding and financing under the Office of Indian Energy, but also the Loan Programs Office. So I think we're sending out the notice today, so I will make sure to send it to everybody on this at this conference, and so that you have kind of save the date notice and welcome participation from tribal leaders, tribal entities that are working around energy, to hear your input on how are we doing as Office of Indian Energy on our funding opportunities, and hearing your feedback. Same with the Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program. How can that be strengthened? And we want to hear your input. So that's the area that that we've been focused on in these past few weeks. The other priority is energy access and energy poverty, and addressing these critical issues that continue to be present in our communities, which is definitely when I'm actually I went home this weekend, and we don't have electricity and running water. And so, when I do go home, it's this reminder, to our communities, just lack of basic infrastructure. And that's pretty common throughout. I know for here on Navajo, that a lot of people don't have access to broadband infrastructure. And I think energy access and energy poverty is one of my main priorities for this office. And so there will be a number of initiatives where linked to funding and opportunities that can help with that. And I know in remote villages in Alaska that is something I'm hearing a lot that needs support. And so open to talking more about that with you all. The other area that I feel like is really important is capacity building, which I mentioned, is the need to equip the knowledge, experience, technical education to a community from someone who's even in high school beyond to elders, that they there's an education that is needed. And I think Christopher spoke to this, is just like the education and awareness around the kind of 101 of energy, and then in this looking at renewable energy, but also strategic energy planning, all of those pieces that are needed to plan for the future. And I think capacity building is so critical, especially for rural and remote communities. It's good to have somebody that's local, that's trained, that can manage and maintain systems that are there, then contracting people outside, and coming in. And I think those are all the things that we need to do better at. And so I think this capacity building is really key. Of course, I think Indian country and our tribal nations are in need of more funding, and definitely advocating for more funding support for tribes. And number 6 is 7th generation planning, which is this, similar to strategic energy planning, looking at our holistic approach to planning. And each nation has their own traditional knowledge of planning. And I think 7th generation tries to kind of talk and speak to that. It's like, 200, 500 years from now, where are we going? What's it going to be like for our future generations around water, around power, around food, around our climate? And it's getting us to really think and plan for the future. And I want to share more about that at some point, but I feel like that's really key and critical as a community and a nation coming together to do that type of planning, because that's how we used to always plan as Native and Indigenous peoples. And a lot of these goals are in line with, the clean energy goals, the equity goals is in line with our traditional teachings as Native people. The other priority is lifting up successful stories that IE has been a part of, and how we have supported within these 10 years, the projects that have sparked job creation, that have sparked, expansion of renewable energy projects, that have built capacity internally for tribal nations and energy managers, and to grow. And that's what we want to continue to encourage. So the 2 things I wanted to really point to that has come out of the, I think one question was around policy and this administration's focus on research and equitable solutions that Biden has been speaking to. And there's 2 executive orders that have come out since January, one on tribal consultation and equity. These 2 executive orders, one is advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. And you can just go online, or I can put it in the chat. And then the other one is executive order 13115 or 13175, tribal consultation and strengthening nation-to-nation relationships. In speaking to the first executive order, I feel like this is really our Department of Energy is doing an assessment on how are we incorporating equity and looking at supporting the underserved communities. And most of these communities are people of color communities, including tribal people, tribal nations, and looking at how we can best prioritize too and support these regions throughout the US, in urban communities and rural communities. And I'm really excited because there's been a lot of effort from all agencies and within DOE to really take this policy or this executive order and implement it within all of our programs. So within Office of Indian Energy, in the priorities I listed earlier, it is uplifting, some of these kind of areas that we are nations that we haven't really, maybe not haven't benefited from our grants program, or that haven't participated in any of the opportunities that we have out there, or are dealing with no access to power and or pay a lot of funding or their own money for power, and those are the kind of areas that we want to prioritize. And just want to put it out there that also there's an initiative called the Justice 40 that is focused on 40% of clean energy investment is going to go into environmental justice communities, and that includes tribes. So there's going to be a number of initiatives and funding opportunities for tribal nations, which I'm really excited about, and really honored to work with so many people on this initiative. And the other executive order, we are working on a draft report on our first consultation session, and we hopefully will have a plan on how we're going to carry that out soon that is going to be shareable. But I just want to say that these executive orders are kind of the foundation. I mean, for IE, it's been the guiding kind of principle of how we are operating as well, and incorporating these values into our work. And I know that there's still a lot that we need to do as a office, and just want to say that I appreciate you all giving me this time to speak and connect with you. I still have a lot to learn about Alaska, and I look forward to visiting Alaska soon as well, when it's safe. And I wish you all good blessings. I wish you the safety and protection during this time of this pandemic. And also, thank you for letting me speak today to you all. So I think that concludes my presentation, and thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And we certainly would welcome you up here in Alaska. So you just give us heads up, we'll welcome with open arms. So thank you again for sharing your work with us today. And thank you all the panelists for sharing your work today. Again, I'd like to just direct your attention to some of the questions that were asked in the Q&A panel. And I'd like to just do my best to make sure that they all get asked in our discussion. I'll make sure they get answered in our discussion if any of them aren't unanswered. But it's time to move to the panel discussion questions. And I'll ask the panelists to please turn on your cameras and keep your mics muted until you're ready to speak. But before we do that, I would like to introduce another person who's joining us. This is Daisy Weinart. She's the general manager of Itmachek Electric Company, which serves the remote community of Deering in Northwest Alaska, we heard about earlier today. As you saw earlier, this utility has a hybrid wind diesel system and has been testing the integration of solar PV and a battery system to further decrease the reliance on diesel fuel. Daisy also serves as the utility representative on the Northwest Arctic Energy Steering Community. So thank you for joining us today, Daisy. I think I see you on here. I don't see you up yet if you're here. Might be your phone. Great. Are you there, Daisy? All right, we'll get that figured out. We'll get that figured. Great, thank you. Well, the focus of our panel discussion is on community needs, just like we've been talking about, and how energy and climate equity can inform the clean energy transition and policy and research for remote Alaska communities. It's a continuation of the themes presented by our past 5 presenters. We have about 40 minutes. I'll have some questions that I'll pose to guide the discussion. We're going to spend about 5 minutes of discussion on each. This conversation is rich, and it will probably take more than the 40 minutes to fully touch all of our individual needs here who are of people who are participating in this conference today, but networking is part of the program here. Our presenters have provided contact information, so feel free to follow up with the conference organizers or the presenters directly this week. And we've got all week to do this. So let's start off with our first question. The first question is about policies. It's federal, state, and local policies. We've discussed today front and center the executive orders 13985 on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities, and also EO 13175, which supports tribal consultation, strengthening nation-to-nation relationships, as Walea just presented. Have we missed any guiding policies? So what other policies exist to ensure that this global energy transition is implemented equitably in rural and remote communities in the Arctic? Please just feel free to jump in and answer.
So, oh. JC, I think you're muted.
Try it now, Daisy. Oh, we're still not hearing you. It looks like you're unmuted technically from this side. There may be another hardware thing going on. We've all been there. Don't feel badly. No, we can't hear you yet.
Daisy, sometimes, so your mute button has a little up.
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
We hear you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Daisy Weinert. I'm with the Ipnichak Electric Company in Deering. I work with Sonny Adams and Brian Hirsch a lot. They brought a lot of projects to Deering, so now we're getting pretty modern over here in Alaska. It's rural Alaska, I should say. We're a small village of maybe 162 people. We have one street. It's about a mile long, one stop sign. So we're pretty good. Last summer, was it last summer? The other summer, Brian Hirsch, Terrestrial Jones, and Sonny Adams had the battery project and the solar project at the same time. So now we have solar, wind, and battery, thanks to Brian and everybody over there. Hey, I see some NREL. Hi, Liz. I don't know if I remember you from Colorado.
I remember you. It's nice to see you again.
Well, thank you for that, Daisy. I saw, Walea, I think I saw you raise your hand. Was that to speak?
Yeah, so another initiative that I didn't speak to is the energy transition. That is, I think they're drafting a report right now on energy transition communities. So looking at coal, oil communities, gas communities, areas where industries have recently closed or will be closing due to the market, and assistance for frontline communities, or they call them energy communities, with investment and diversifying their economy and looking at other renewable energy projects and support. So that's something that hopefully will be coming out soon, and been a part of that working group. And it's a more of an interagency effort as well. And I think that's the neat thing about this administration, is that encouraging all of the agencies to work together on policies, because you go to Indian country, and sometimes if you're going to go there to talk about power or or energy, there's all of these other things that tribal members bring up around infrastructure, broadband, housing, health. And I think this kind of interagency coordination helps us to know who's doing what within like USDA and EPA, or Department of Interior and how they're all interconnected. And so just wanted to mention that that's one thing that will be coming out. And again, prioritizing tribes, that's been my role, is to be that advocate. So for our tribal communities and tribal nations.
I'd like to re-mention, because I think I was talking kind of fast, but Executive Order 14088 by President Biden, issued early in the administration, January 27th. And that is the climate change executive order I mentioned that commits the United States to carbon neutrality by 2050 and a electricity sector that's carbon neutral even earlier, perhaps as early as 2035. This is a real driving purpose at DOE and of course at all other agencies, and of course will lead to U.S. re-participation in various international climate bodies that it had ceased participating in. But this is a driving force. Again, I can't emphasize enough how real the climate crisis is to the leadership of this country and of the department, and it will have impacts across, positive impacts hopefully, but impacts across the board as people prepare to address the challenges of climate change, which have gone unaddressed for quite a while.
Fantastic.
I'll put the link.
Bruno, can I just jump in there really quickly? There's on the rural side for energy efficiency, there are some real challenges with 100% renewable. And particularly in the area of, a big way that we're going to get there is through, or that the pathway show is the most economically feasible way to get there is through electrification. And so electrifying all of our systems. And in rural communities, and well, they don't have to be rural communities either. This house that I'm standing in downtown Denver has this challenge. We put in fuel sources that are not renewable. And when we do that in households, and then we replace them in emergency situations, right? So our furnace goes out, we replace it in an emergency. We don't think about how we might do that with a heat pump or something like that, right? And we just replace it. And then we're signed up for another 30 years of this fuel that we have, or we have a big sunk cost. So there are some real challenges on the energy efficiency side that, like, I think sort of to your point, Bruno, about like what is available to us, like these are the things, and this is not a solution, it's not an answer to your question, but like these are the things that we're going to have to work out. And I think that rural communities are really well placed to help lead and identify some of those challenges and then work with researchers on what those solutions that actually work for rural communities might be. So I just wanted to weigh in on that because it's, I work at NREL, so of course I'm a big fan of high market share renewables, but it's gonna be tricky. It
will be tricky, yes. While we have you, by the way, Liz, there's a question in the Q&A that I think you or Mike could answer. It's from George Rowe. Exciting news about ETIP. How can the various communities participating engage with one another and others to share knowledge for maximal leverage of DOE investment? Yeah, I saw that question and I manipulated it by not answering it so that I could talk about ETIP more. So the way that we have that structured for networking, and I think we need to create more opportunities for that within the context of that program, and the context of other programs. But the way that we have it structured right now is that our stakeholder engagement organizations are supported to help create that network, right? So in Alaska, and for Northwestern U.S. community, Northwestern U.S. communities, or CONUS communities, we have ASEP and REAP, two wonderful organizations who won competitive bids to support that program as regional stakeholder engagement experts. And so they're supported to do that. Not enough, it's never enough. But they have increased networking capabilities, and they'll be working with the communities and also other communities in those regions to help support further networking of those potential solutions. Thanks for asking, George. Thank you. There are a few more in there that I'll try to ask them while we get to sort of the next topic questions here. So thank you for answering that first one. The next one, just thinking about the graph about the long view and the time it takes to roll out this major infrastructure in history. The one that you shared, Liz, but it's for everyone. So do current near-term federal agency programmatic activities, specifically in support of energy R&D, does it prepare us for the speed and the scale of the energy transition that are required to meet these climate goals?
This is Brian. I could maybe jump in a little bit. First thing I guess that came to mind when you asked that question is R&D, research and development. My experience is that in the villages, we need the next D, which is deployment. And I know, having been at NREL for a while and really having a steep learning curve when I worked there, especially with regard to Department of Energy, it was really a bit of a surprise to realize how much of the focus was on the research and sort of that 5 or 10 year ahead vision, which absolutely is important and theoretically keeps our technical leadership globally and all of that fresh and current. But the reality is that, like what Daisy was describing a little bit earlier here, I mean, every community has immediate needs, and you know, in a community of roughly 150, 160 people, I mean, we've spent millions of dollars and, you know, have been out there tens or dozens of times. In fact, we're going tomorrow. You know, Sunny and I are heading up that way. And so, I mean, there's ongoing needs. We thought we had everything worked out, and lo and behold, boom, now the wind turbine needs some loving, tender care right now. So there ought to be a focus on sort of the longer term or what have you. But I mean, it seems like if we don't address the immediate issues and how they transition into the next year or 2 or 3, you know, down the road is a whole bunch of sort of discussions among a bunch of smart people somewhere far away, but that doesn't have real impact. And that's part of the disconnect between, you know, the people who are getting paid to do all this stuff and sitting in a lab or doing what have you, and the people who are really helping us figure this stuff out by living it on a daily basis. So it's not any knock on anybody. It's just a matter of where is the focus or emphasis, and you know, different people are better or oriented toward different approaches, and that's wonderful. And I understand, you know, the research side here is really important to look at the longer term, but there's a lot in the shorter urgent term that yeah, we hope gets a lot of focus as well.
That leads actually quite nicely into a question Isaac Vanderberg has in there with his, I think this is in response to Mike's presentation. You mentioned deployment in your slides. Is DOE able to provide direct investment in infrastructure projects through public partnerships with infrastructure funds? And how can DOE Arctic Energy Office directly support deployment through getting projects built?
Wow, that's a loaded question. You know, it's one of those, I want to say the answer is no, but, or yes, however. There are ways, and I would not want to go down that on this call. However, I think the real issue, kind of what Bruce was talking about, you know, on deployment, talking about research, talking about deployment, I think we do ourselves a favor if we were willing to, the body of people here, we need to look at accelerating. This is my own personal view now, not that of AEO. We need to look at accelerating deployment. The climate crisis is here. The market will be playing catch up probably for a few years and making equipment available and at scale. We need to look at accelerating test deployments and possibly even test into place of new technology, i.e. test and retain rather than test and bring back and then iterate to the next version. To get technology out faster, to get the bugs out faster. My own view is that, and there's a role for organizations like Launch Alaska or similar organizations. We need to accelerate fielding, accepting the technical risk, of course, of deploying at a lower TRL. But I think I think there are some real benefits to be looked at from accelerating technology deployment. Again, and of course, not talking about safety, talking more about mechanical and financial risk, not safety risk, but looking at accelerating technology deployment, I think would benefit communities immensely as we go through this energy transition and as we potentially address more and more climate challenges. Again, that's my own personal view. I feel free to differ.
Well, I'll throw, okay, I'm just gonna say one thing is that some people who are raising their hands, we don't really have the ability for you to speak here. So I'll ask you again, if you're raising your hands, please direct your questions to the question and answer. That's the way we can engage with the audience here. So this is a question I think for perhaps Walea, Chris, or Daisy, just because we haven't made you talk yet here. When we talk about demonstration deployment, what kind of demonstration deployment speaks to you in this? In terms of what we see, what we need.
Are you asking me?
Whoever feels so moved.
Demonstration deployment. I feel like for the Office of Indian Energy, that's been our main focus, is getting projects in the ground and where tribes have already thought through kind of all the pre-development pieces. And like Brian mentioned, is, we need the other D deployment piece. Sometimes tribes aren't ready for the deployment piece, and I think that's a critical opportunity to help support tribes to whether it's capacity building or supporting, we have an application process and assistance process that there's requests on our website. If you go to our website, where you can request technical assistance. And I think there are different ways that IE has been of support. And I do feel like I like what Brian said, is just the kind of on the ground troubleshooting some of the existing technology that is there, building capacity locally, getting input from the kind of place-based region. And I think that's going to be critical for energy transition, that it's not, we have to be working with local communities because they understand the year-long needs, the seasons, the shifting that's happening with climate, and the expenses, and those are all. That's all the information that is needed to make informed decisions on how to plan for the future. And going back to the policy on equity, that's one of our areas is going to be focused on place-based communities and tribes, because that investment is really going to help us get to supporting the technology and the deployment efforts and funding efforts for place-based communities. So that's kind of how I see it. I don't know if that answers your question, but I want to advocate for the communities have a role in this. Community organizations have a role in this, because just transition, it's a big word or a couple words, talks to that. It speaks to how energy transition is going to look, where it's not kind of a top-down effort. It's really like investing on the bottom up too, and building capacity and doing the future energy planning that is needed to get us to a place where we are more in a self-reliant position.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, I think I'm going to share a little bit more on context and historically with Indian energy and deployment. So one of the things that we don't have, and this is true for all the directors, is you have the reality of 570 plus tribes and the entire country with an office that has in the beginning started off anywhere from 10, 12. I operated with 16 million, and then tried to break it into these 3 program areas that Walea is talking about. And when you talk about deployment, not only are you juggling those programs, you still got to run your office. And we had at one point 1 person for lower 48 and 1 person for all of Alaska. You can't really deploy projects, resources, when you have 1 person running from one fire to the next. So one of the biggest things in deployment, and this is where we talked about development and deployment, and we separated in our time frame, was looking to see, can we improve upon the deployment of our actual office, members of our team out into Indian country. And to do it right, I think you need to have regional breakouts, because the Northwest and the lower 48 is different from the Arctic region of Alaska, which is different from the Great Lakes, is different from the South. And so we needed to have more folks. And my bottom line on all of this is the Office of Indian Energy, with the help of everybody here and others, needs, and especially in Alaska, and I can say this for you, Walea, because I'm not political anymore, we need folks to really push members on the Hill. And at that time, it was Lisa Murkowski, and they had the majority to say, look, we need more dollars for the office. And there was really, minimally, we needed a tenfold increase in the budget of the Office of Indian Energy. What we have now are things like the Tribal Loan Guarantee Program, but we still haven't solved the equation on what we looked at in terms of these categories of dollars to support projects from 0 to 20 million, and then 20 to 60 million, and then the big ones above that. So we haven't done that, and we need to do that. And then the last thing I'll share is really the whole public-private partnerships. Roundtables were key to that. Mooney's did that. So maybe you can talk to the secretary now, Walea, and saying business roundtables are helpful, but with the focus of saying, can we really build this thing called a tribal private partnership? I don't like the whole acronym TP, but I mean, it's definitely something that we need to look at in terms of getting industry involved as well. So a lot there, and I know we got time for other stuff, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could add one thing real briefly, just to what I was saying earlier, Indian Energy is really a notable exception in terms of a focus on deployment. And it has been a welcome, refreshing focus, and really has, I think, had huge impact, especially relative to the budget. And what Chris was just mentioning is absolutely a reality, that Indian Energy is part of a much, much bigger effort in terms of DOE. And it does seem like you folks ought to have a lot larger budget, and not just from the deployment side, which I think you've done as successfully as you possibly could with the money that you have, but really the technical assistance effort that Sunny was mentioning earlier. And Chris, I know that was really your leadership that brought that to pass. And it has been, I think, a very high impact program, and it has lived, through to this day. It's ending this September. And so for the last 5 years, a lot of the projects that occur, certainly in Alaska, including the Deering and Buckland ones that we talked about earlier, absolutely had to do with your support for creating that technical assistance initiative. So thank you for that, and just kind of acknowledging what you folks have done with the cards that you've been dealt to date.
Nicely said, Brian. Thank you. Thank you. And starting there are so many great questions. Oh, I see, Daisy, you have your hand raised. I just want to add, just for context, a side note here that Scott Waterman brought up. And it says, isn't deployment of working systems in harsh environments called research and development? He saw it as a kind of a framing question, but since we're still on the RDD&D piece here, research, development, deployment, demonstration. Daisy, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, hello. I do, and I might have missed the first few questions because I had all this ready, before we started, and then we jumped from question 5, and I wrote all this down so I'll be prepared. But from the local part, for the researchers or deployment for projects and stuff, the more info the researchers give to the community, say like Brian comes here with another project, the more info he gives, to the community at a community meeting or something, the more transparent, the project will be, and easier it will be for the community to be involved, and have them included on the decision making and whatnot, and local policies. As long as you work with, Deering, we have the tribe, and then we have the city of Deering, and those two kind of come together for like the whole village, like whether it's on city limits or if it's on native lands, then we have to work with one or the other. But as long as we have the community involved of wherever you're working at, included on the decision making, that'd be great. And it'll be easier in the long run for that part. I jumped in maybe too soon on that.
You're great, and we're just sort of moving. We're trying to go to the questions as sort of we feel moved here. So, and really, we're trying to do the topics of the conversation more on policy, and then sort of the research, and then in how are we being inclusive about it. So, we did ask the question of what policies are here to support us. But one of the questions that are maybe we haven't asked yet is what policies are we missing? What do we need to ensure that that this global energy transition is equitably implemented? Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. So right now we are creating a metrics on just what exists, the data in our federal programs related to the demographics. And for IE, I've been looking through tribal nations and certain demographics like unemployment rate, to what is the other one? There's a few, and I think remoteness and location, and these areas, I feel like for most tribes, I feel like they're definitely up there in the kind of inequity map, if there was one, and haven't had access to resources, and noting that we need to look at our policies and garner them, that support, low, moderate incomes, families that are, with COVID also struggling to pay and deciding what to pay, what energy, to pay for, whether it's broadband or your energy costs, which I think I've heard from different leaders this week, but also struggling with the transition and closure of certain industries, like limiting the production of certain fossil energy, and how that's had an economic impact. And those are the areas I feel like with our office and Department of Energy, taking a look at those communities and nations in a kind of environmental justice map. There's a tool on EPA's environmental justice screen map that shows where these communities are. And so it is a process, and I think that we are actively working on that. And it's also centered around, place-based communities and initiatives. And I think anything that comes out, I would love to stay in touch with you all and share these opportunities, because it's going to be significant for tribes and local communities. But the question is, what do the local communities need as far as capacity to apply for funding or to be able to access these opportunities? Do they have an accountant? Do they have, you know, these pieces that are that is needed to be able to submit an application and all those things? So those are areas that I'm really wanting to go a little bit deeper. The other piece is also we have a grant application, and I've heard from a number of tribal nations that it's a lengthy application and the requirements are sometimes hard, and that and it's some tribes don't have that capacity, and they spend a lot of funding just trying to, you know, meet the kind of criteria before the application happens. And I think that that's something that I would love to continue to work with and talk with tribes, like what would be a good process for that, and while still abiding by, you know, our statute and you know, our agency, so that we are being aware of some of these barriers to tribes. And but I just wanted to add that piece that we are actively working on all of it, and I'm just really excited about the opportunities for tribal communities.
I had two comments here I just want to bring into discussion. One is from Sharon Kenny, says, hello, the EPA is currently planning to incorporate environmental justice policies within our work. It'd be great to find areas where we could collaborate with Arctic communities that reside in areas that can qualify as environmental justice priorities. Thank you for sharing that. There's another question up here from Mindy O'Neill. She says, we know there's a huge gap in the technical assistance for grant administration. I'm concerned this problem will become even more exacerbated as the American Rescue Plan, which is COVID, and infrastructure funds are being allocated. Is there a central organization or training effort who can train locals to build capacity within organizations to use these funds efficiently and effectively in a way that best assists their communities? Would anyone like to take a shot at that? And perhaps, if not, because we are putting people on the spot with this, this is something maybe perhaps we could think about and come back to in either follow-up questions or just reach out specifically now that we know everybody who's on this screen. So thank you for asking that, Mindy. We have about 10 more minutes left in here. So one of the things I guess we want to ask, is there any blatantly obvious pieces of research we're missing that would inform the development of these policies? Is there anything that we need? Does anyone have anything they'd like to speak to that?
I just want to say I spoke with folks yesterday, Sunny, and I mentioned to him that I've been wanting to see as we're doing this kind of equity piece, those numbers, the data around, you know, demographics of tribes and how much they're paying per, you know, of their, you know, income on power and fuel, or as a village in general. I think that's gonna help also be an advocate for you all in these remote locations for tribes and tribal communities. So anything that you can send my way, that would be great, because I know for the lower 48, you know, those that information is kind of not easy to access, but, you know, there are some people that I can call and find that. But if there would be someone that can help me from Alaska, that would be great.
Thank you. That's a call. That's a call to action. So thank you. How about we've talked a lot about Alaska's specific conditions and contexts that may help inform federal agency decision making in energy research projects. Are there any that we're missing that maybe we may have missed in our discussion and presentations today? We've discussed a lot, and so I think silence is a fine answer, but I see Liz piping up.
Well, and I don't know, I'm actually still stuck. I'm still reading Mindy O'Neill's question around capacity development for grants. And it is, I think, it's the flip side of what Walea was talking about with the length of the grant applications and the challenges there. And I'm not a representative of the department on this front, but I think one of the challenges like getting people ready to be able to access those and making access of those simpler are two sides of the same coin. And so one of the things we've been trying to do with programs like ETIP and the longer term technical assistance that I think was what Brian was referring to from Office of Indian Energy, has been really thinking about how you support, and this came up this morning a lot, like how you support a champion, right? Like how do you get someone in the community who is already a champion, what they need and the training they need. And so I don't have a great answer for you, Mindy, but that question is really resonating with me and I didn't want to let it go silent. And I think as we think, it's really helpful to hear that, because I certainly have a sense of that from my experience, but to hear it directly in forums like this really enables us to design programming that even if we can't get in there and really like be your hired grant writer, we can like help support those champions more. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but I didn't want to let it go in silence because it's really important.
Thank you, Liz. Two last questions for you, and I think it's probably the most important questions that we have here. So one of which is, how can researchers who are working in this Arctic space, how can they better incorporate community needs within energy research projects to orient the outcomes toward climate and energy equity? Anyone like to hit that?
Well, they could definitely have a community meeting. So when Deering has a project, everybody's invited and everybody comes in and gives their comments or concerns on the projects, how it's going to be maintained after the project is completed and, the costs afterwards and stuff like that. I think the best way for that would be to actually meet the community and meet the people in that village or wherever and see what they have to say about it.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's the definition of being inclusive, right? So I think that really leads well, and I think these are parallel questions. This with how can we meaningfully be inclusive? How can the researchers who come engage in these communities meaningfully and respectfully and inclusively leverage the skills and the talents and the knowledge of these northern communities in their work? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'll just say a little bit based on the tribal consultation. I think okay. I would say, I mean, this was a lot of the input we got was giving a head's notice and reaching out and having conversations. And, they also referenced the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And there's principles in there on how to engage with tribal communities and work with tribal communities on, I guess, meeting also halfway. And it's definitely needed. And I feel like there are also a lot of cultural sensitivity training that is important for everybody, for tribes and working with tribal nations and even internally within DOE. Why do we have this consultation practice and sessions and policy, and that history is something that is critical for each of us, all of us Americans, to understand the history, and that's what I encourage everyone to understand, the history of the land that you live on, because for most tribes, the history is where a lot of these policies were developed, and particularly around energy development. And you got to also be patient, and that's something that I think with most communities are different, but I also think like there are principles of making sure that we are supportive when we're in a place that we're meeting communities where they're at, and not pushing anything on them, but sharing the resources and opportunities so that they can make an informed decision on their future. They can make an informed decision on their planning and where they're going to go on behalf of the community. And I think that's really important, and it's a process. So.
Excellent. Does anyone else have anything like to add to that? In my mind, this is the most important piece to talk about. And of course, we've been talking about this through the panelists' presentations this morning. And again, this is meant to set the tone and set the stage for how we're going to go about the next 2 days. Really appreciate all of you for spending time with us this morning, for sharing your talents with us and the work you're doing. And we are just behind you and your folks here in your new roles as we look ahead and addressing these issues, not just the next few days, but the next several years as we kind of walk through to our future together. This conference today and tomorrow and the next day is being recorded. You've got our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. If anyone you know would like to see this, or if there are any references in here you'd like to catch, please reach out to the organizers here, and we will be happy to connect you with that. I know, Walea, you asked for some questions about a percentage of families' income going to energy costs. I think we can provide some of that. Steve Colt put some in the Q&A as well. Really, just to give you a heads up again, tomorrow, we are going to be talking about buildings and infrastructure, and that's going to start at 8:30 tomorrow morning. So again, a big round of applause virtually to all of you for being here today, and thank you again, and thank you all, the participants, for being a part of this. And we look forward to speaking with you and seeing you tomorrow. All right. Thank you all.
And thank you, Bruno. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.